Imagine being saved on the worst day of your life and realizing salvation comes with a badge, a packed schedule, and total availability. She signed. He smiled like someone who never loses. And suddenly, the real danger wasn't the debt. It was being near him every day. The autumn rain had started early that morning, turning London's streets into rivers of grey and silver. Eliza Whitfield sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair of the bank's waiting area, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. She had been there for 2 hours, watching clients come and go, each one leaving with what they needed while she remained frozen in place, waiting for a miracle that wouldn't come. Her father's gambling debts had grown beyond anything she could comprehend. Numbers that made her stomach turn, deadlines that felt like nooses tightening around their necks, men with cold eyes showing up at their modest flat every night, their threats growing more explicit with each visit. She had sold everything of value, her mother's jewelry, the few nice things she owned, even the car that barely ran. She had begged friends, distant relatives, anyone who might listen, but no one had this kind of money. No one could make this nightmare disappear. When the bank manager finally called her name, Eliza's legs trembled as she stood. The walk to his office felt like miles. She could feel every eye in that pristine building on her, the security guard by the door, the tellers behind their stations, the well-dressed clients who belonged in a place like this while she clearly didn't. "Miss Whitfield," the manager said, his voice professionally sympathetic, but ultimately empty. "I've reviewed your application again and I'm afraid, please." The word broke from her throat before she could stop it. "Please, I'm begging you. My father, they're going to hurt him. These people, they're dangerous. I just need time, or a loan, or anything. I'll work every day for the rest of my life to pay it back." Her voice cracked, tears burning behind her eyes that she desperately tried to hold back. She hated this, hated the desperation, the humiliation of sitting in this chair, pleading with a stranger who looked at her like she was a problem to be managed rather than a person drowning. "I understand your situation is difficult," he continued, shuffling papers that probably contained her entire pathetic financial history. "But the amount you're requesting, combined with your current income and lack of collateral, makes it impossible for us to approve any loan. I'm truly sorry. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion." Eliza felt something inside her shatter. This had been her last hope, the final door before everything collapsed completely. "There must be something," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Some program, some exception. I'm a good worker. I've never missed a payment on anything. I just need help." The manager's expression softened slightly, but his answer remained the same. No. She left his office feeling like a ghost, moving through the bank's marble lobby without really seeing anything. The tears she had held back finally spilled over, silent and hot on her cheeks. She didn't bother wiping them away. What did it matter anymore? What Eliza didn't know was that someone had been listening to every word. Callum Redford stood in the private client suite on the building's upper floor, reviewing acquisition contracts that would normally demand his complete attention. At 39, he had built an empire through discipline, strategic coldness, and an ability to read people and situations with brutal accuracy. His company controlled significant portions of the UK's commercial real estate market, and his reputation was impeccable. A man who never made reckless decisions, who calculated every move, who kept his personal life so private it might as well not exist. He had come to this bank for a routine meeting about investment portfolios, nothing that required his personal presence, but something he preferred to handle himself. Control was everything to Callum, always had been. The glass walls of the suite were designed for privacy, while maintaining the appearance of openness. One could see out, but sound rarely travelled in. Usually. But something about the desperate timbre of a woman's voice had cut through everything else, pulling his attention away from the documents in front of him. He moved to the window, looking down into the lobby below. That was when he saw her. She was small, drowning in a coat that had seen better days, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Even from this distance, even through glass, he could see her shoulders shaking, could sense the weight of whatever burden she carried. She looked fragile, broken, but there was something else, a dignity in the way she held herself even while falling apart, a strength that flickered beneath the devastation. Callum watched as she stood from the chair, watched as she walked toward the exit with her head down, tears streaming unchecked. Something uncomfortable twisted in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation that he immediately tried to dismiss. This wasn't his concern. He didn't involve himself in other people's problems. He had learned long ago that caring led to weakness, that opening yourself up meant giving someone the power to destroy you. He had been burned badly enough to know better, but he couldn't look away. She pushed through the bank's heavy doors and disappeared into the rain, and Callum stood there longer than he should have, staring at the space where she had been. "Mr. Redford?" His assistant's voice came from behind him. "The portfolio manager is ready for you." Callum turned away from the window, his expression carefully neutral. "One moment." He walked to the door, then paused. "That woman who was just speaking with the loan manager downstairs. I want her name and every detail about why she was here." His assistant blinked, surprised. In all the years of working for Callum Redford, she had never seen him take interest in anything that didn't directly relate to business. "Sir?" "Now," Callum said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made it clear this wasn't a request. He didn't understand why he was doing this, didn't understand the pull he felt, or the way her image seemed burned into his mind. Those desperate eyes, that trembling voice, the way she had begged for help that never came. It wasn't rational, it wasn't strategic. It went against every rule he had built his life around. But Callum Redford had built his fortune on trusting his instincts, even when they didn't make sense, and every instinct he possessed was telling him that walking away from this woman would be the biggest mistake of his life. Within an hour he had her name, Eliza Whitfield, and every detail of the debt that was destroying her family. The numbers were staggering, the situation more dangerous than he had imagined. Her father had gotten involved with the wrong people, and now they both would pay the price unless someone intervened. Callum sat in his office long after everyone else had gone home, rain hammering against the windows, staring at the file in front of him. He should close it, forget about it, move on with his meticulously controlled life. Instead, he reached for his phone and made a call that would change everything. 3 days had passed since Eliza's humiliation at the bank, and they had been the worst of her life. The men who her father owed money to had stopped being polite about their threats. One had grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises when she answered the door, his breath reeking of cigarettes, as he informed her they had 1 week left before things got unpleasant. She had spent those 3 days in a haze of panic, applying for jobs that paid better than her current position as a bookstore clerk, researching loan sharks even though she knew that would only make things worse, lying awake at night, listening to her father's labored breathing in the next room, and wondering how everything had spiraled so completely out of control. So when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, she almost didn't answer. Probably another creditor, another threat, another reminder of how thoroughly she had failed. But something made her pick up. "Miss Eliza Whitfield." The voice was female, professional, cool. "Yes," Eliza answered cautiously, her stomach knotting with familiar dread. "I'm calling on behalf of Redford Enterprises. Mr. Redford would like to meet with you regarding a potential employment opportunity. Would you be available tomorrow at 2 o'clock? Eliza's mind went blank. She had never heard of Redford Enterprises, had never applied for any position there. "I think there's been a mistake. I didn't—" "There's no mistake, Miss Whitfield. Mr. Redford was quite specific. The address is Canary Wharf, Tower 42. Security will be expecting you." A pause. "He mentioned that this concerns a matter you were handling at Barclays last week. The bank." This was about the bank. Eliza's heart began to pound. "I don't understand." "All will be explained tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Good day, Miss Whitfield." The line went dead, leaving Eliza staring at her phone in complete confusion. Part of her wanted to ignore it, to dismiss it as some cruel joke or scam. But another part, the desperate, drowning part, clung to the possibility that this might be the miracle she had begged for. Callum adjusted his tie for the 3rd time in as many minutes, a nervous habit he didn't normally possess. He stood at the window of his office, watching the Thames glitter in the afternoon sun, trying to understand why his heart rate had picked up the moment his assistant informed him that Eliza Whitfield had arrived. He had spent 3 days researching everything about her. Not just the debt, but her. Where she worked, how she lived, what kind of person she was. He had learned that she was 27, that she had dropped out of university when her mother died to take care of her father, that she worked full-time at a bookstore in Camden and still barely made rent. He learned that she had never been in trouble, paid every bill on time despite having almost nothing, and that everyone who knew her described her as kind. and he had learned exactly how deep the hole her father had dug really was. The actual debt was substantial but manageable. What made it dangerous were the people her father owed, loan sharks with connections to organized crime, men who didn't stop at financial ruin. Callum had used his contacts to buy out every single one of those debts, paying triple what was owed, to ensure there would be no retaliation, no loopholes, no way for anyone to ever threaten the Whitfield family again. His business partner and closest friend, Marcus, had called him insane. "You paid what for some stranger, Callum? What the hell is going on with you?" "It's an investment," Callum had replied coldly, the lie tasting bitter on his tongue, because it wasn't an investment. It was something he couldn't name, something that had started the moment he heard her voice breaking with desperation and had only intensified when he saw her file photo, those large, expressive eyes that seemed to hold both fragility and incredible strength. "Mr. Redford?" His assistant appeared at the door. "Miss Whitfield is here." Callum turned from the window, his expression schooled into the neutral mask he wore like armor. "Send her in." The door opened, and Eliza Whitfield walked into his office. She looked different than she had at the bank, still wearing clothes that had seen better days, but she had made an effort. Her dark hair was down, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. She wore minimal makeup, but it only highlighted the natural beauty of her features. High cheekbones, full lips, those devastating eyes that were currently wide with nervousness and confusion. Callum felt something shift in his chest, something dangerous and completely unwelcome. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Miss Whitfield, please, sit." Eliza moved carefully, like she was afraid of breaking something in this office full of glass and steel and expensive minimalism. She perched on the edge of the leather chair, her hands clasped in her lap, in that same way he remembered from the bank. "I don't understand why I'm here," she said quietly, her voice steadier than he expected. "I've never applied to work for your company." Callum sat behind his desk, creating distance he desperately needed. Up close, she was even more affecting than he had imagined. Delicate features, a vulnerability in her expression that made something protective flare to life inside him, a subtle scent of vanilla and rain that he found disturbingly appealing. "I know," he said, keeping his tone professional. "I asked you here. I have a proposition for you, Miss Whitfield." Her eyes narrowed slightly, wariness creeping in. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that solves your problem." He slid a folder across the desk. "Your father's debts, all of them, completely paid off, effective immediately. No more threats, no more collectors, no more danger. Your family will be protected." Eliza's hands trembled as she opened the folder, scanning the documents inside with growing shock. This is impossible. How do you even know about—" "I was at the bank last week. I heard your conversation with the loan manager." Callum leaned back in his chair, watching every flicker of emotion cross her face. "I made some calls, handled the situation." "You paid—" She looked up at him, those eyes now filled with tears. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me." "No," Callum agreed. "I don't. Which is why there's a condition." And there it was, the wariness transforming into something sharper, more guarded. She closed the folder slowly. "What condition?" "You work for me, exclusively, as my personal assistant for 1 year. You'll manage my schedule, accompany me to meetings and events, handle correspondence. Make yourself available whenever I need you." He kept his voice level, clinical. "In exchange, the debts disappear as if they never existed." Eliza stared at him for a long moment, her mind clearly racing. He could see her trying to find the catch, the hidden trap in an offer that seemed too good to be true. "Nothing illegal," Callum added before she could ask. "Nothing improper, simply work, professional assistance, that's all." "For a year." "For a year." She bit her lower lip, a gesture that Callum found himself tracking with unwanted focus. "And if I refuse, then you walk out of here and we never speak again." He met her eyes steadily. "But the debts remain. And those men don't stop, Miss Whitfield. They escalate." It was manipulation, and he knew it. But it was also the truth. Eliza looked down at the folder again, her hands shaking. He could see the war playing out across her face, pride battling with desperation, dignity struggling against necessity. "I need to think about—" "No," Callum interrupted gently. "You need to decide now. Those men you owe, they don't wait for people to think things through." She flinched slightly, and he hated himself for pushing. But he also needed her to say yes with an intensity that bordered on irrational. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Eliza looked up at him. "If I do this, if I agree, my father is safe. Completely safe?" "Completely," Callum promised, and meant it with every fibre of his being. She took a shaky breath, then reached for the pen on his desk. "Where do I sign?" As he watched her signature appear on the contract, Callum told himself this was just business, a transaction, nothing more. But the relief that flooded through him when she agreed, the way his chest felt lighter seeing that signature, the inexplicable need to protect this woman he barely knew, none of that felt like business at all. It felt like the beginning of something that would consume them both. Eliza's first day at Redford Enterprises began at 7 in the morning, which she discovered was actually late by Callum's standards. He had been in the office since 5:30, his assistant informed her, with a mixture of admiration and exhaustion, and expected everyone on his immediate team to match his intensity. The office itself was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Thames, sleek modern furniture in greys and blacks, everything precisely arranged with not a single item out of place. It felt cold, impersonal, exactly like the man who occupied the corner office. Callum's personal assistant for the past 5 years had retired suddenly, which was why the position was available, or so everyone believed. What they didn't know was that Callum had offered the woman early retirement with a generous severance specifically to create this opening. He would never admit that to anyone, least of all himself. "Miss Whitfield." Callum appeared in the doorway of what would be her office, a smaller space adjacent to his, connected by a door that was currently open. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, emphasizing the broad shoulders and lean athletic build that Eliza had tried very hard not to notice during their first meeting. "We need to establish some ground rules." Eliza set down her bag, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Those dark eyes were intense, unreadable, and made her heart do uncomfortable things she absolutely could not afford to feel. "Of course." He stepped into her office, and the space immediately felt smaller. He was tall, easily 6'2", and carried himself with a presence that dominated any room he entered. "First, you will address me as Mr. Redford at all times. Never Callum, never Sir, just Mr. Redford." "Understood." "Second, our relationship is strictly professional. We are not friends. We will not discuss personal matters unless they directly impact work. You are here to do a job, and I expect it done to perfection." Each word felt like a small cut, but Eliza kept her expression neutral. This was the price of her father's freedom. She could handle coldness. "Yes, Mr. Redford. Third, your schedule revolves around mine. If I need you at 6 in the morning or midnight, you make yourself available. If I travel, you travel. If I work weekends, you work weekends." He paused. "This isn't a request for overtime. It's the job. I understand." Fourth, he moved closer, and Eliza caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken. "What happens in this office, what you see and hear, remains confidential. Always. Lives and fortunes depend on discretion." "I would never—" "I know." The words came out softer than she expected, and for just a moment, something flickered in his expression. "That's why you're here." They stood there in silence, the tension thick enough to cut. Eliza didn't understand what was happening between them, this strange pull, this awareness that made her skin feel too tight, her breathing too shallow. Callum seemed to feel it too, because he stepped back abruptly, his jaw tightening. "Your first task is to familiarize yourself with my schedule for the next month. Everything is in the system. I expect you to anticipate needs before I voice them, to solve problems before they become issues, to be 2 steps ahead at all times. I'll do my best. Your best isn't good enough, Miss Whitfield." His tone was sharp now, back to the cold businessman. "I require perfection. Nothing less." He turned and walked back to his office, leaving Eliza standing there feeling like she had just survived an interrogation. Callum closed his office door and leaned against it, his heart pounding harder than it should. That had been a disaster. He had planned to be distant but professional, to establish necessary boundaries without being cruel. Instead, he had been an absolute bastard, but it was necessary. It had to be. Because standing that close to her, breathing in the soft vanilla scent that clung to her skin, watching the way she bit her lower lip when nervous, seeing the hurt flash across those expressive eyes when he laid down his rules, it had taken every ounce of control he possessed not to do something catastrophically stupid, like pull her into his arms, like apologize for being so cold, like admit that he had been thinking about her constantly for 3 days. He moved to his desk, trying to focus on the acquisition reports that needed his attention, but his eyes kept drifting to the open door connecting their offices, to the glimpses of her moving around, organizing her space. She was reorganizing everything, he noticed, taking the perfectly arranged desk and shifting items, creating a new system that probably made sense only to her. It should have annoyed him. He hated when people touched his things, altered his carefully constructed order. Instead, he found it oddly charming. Callum forced himself to look away, to bury himself in work. This attraction, this pull he felt, it would fade. It had to. He just needed to maintain distance, keep everything professional, and eventually his mind would accept that Eliza Whitfield was just an employee. Nothing more. But when she appeared in his doorway an hour later with his coffee, made exactly how he liked it despite him never telling her, he felt that control slip just a little bit more. The first week was brutal. Callum pushed her harder than seemed reasonable, testing her constantly. He changed his schedule without warning, demanded reports with impossible deadlines, corrected her on the smallest details with a coldness that would have broken someone less determined. But Eliza refused to break. She learned his preferences through observation, how he liked his coffee, which pens he preferred, that he got irritable if he didn't eat by 1 o'clock. She memorized his schedule so thoroughly that she could recite it without looking. She stayed late every night, often not leaving until well after he did, making sure everything was perfect for the next day. And she started to notice things about him too. The way he adjusted his tie whenever he was stressed, how his jaw would tighten when someone challenged him in meetings, the fact that he always stood by the window when making difficult phone calls, staring out at the river, like it helped him think, that despite his coldness, he remembered everyone's names, always said thank you to the cleaning staff, and donated anonymously to charities he thought no one knew about. Callum Redford was not the heartless businessman he pretended to be. He was just very, very good at hiding. By the second week, something began to shift. It started small, Callum asking if she had eaten lunch, his tone still professional but with an edge of actual concern, him adjusting the air conditioning when he noticed her shivering in the overly cold office, the way his eyes would track her movements when he thought she wasn't looking. And then there were the touches. Accidental at first, his hand brushing hers when passing documents, their shoulders touching when leaning over the same report, the brief press of his palm against her lower back when guiding her through a crowded conference room. But they started happening more frequently and lasting longer, and Callum's expression whenever it happened, a flash of something hot and intense before he shut it down, told Eliza that he felt it too. This thing between them. This pull that grew stronger every day despite all his rules about remaining professional. She knew she should be more careful. This was a job, a transaction to save her father. Getting involved with Callum Redford would be monumentally stupid, but her heart didn't seem to care about logic. It just kept racing every time he looked at her, kept hoping for those accidental touches, kept memorizing every detail about a man who was supposed to be nothing more than her employer. And late at night, lying in her small flat, Eliza wondered if Callum lay awake too, fighting the same impossible battle. The incident happened 3 weeks into Eliza's employment, during a particularly tense board meeting. Callum had warned her that morning that today would be difficult. One of the board members, Richard Thornton, had been challenging his decisions for months, trying to undermine his authority with the other executives. The meeting was crucial, a vote on a major acquisition that would either solidify Callum's position or weaken it considerably. Eliza sat in the corner of the conference room, taking notes as instructed, trying to be invisible. She had learned that in these high-stakes situations, her job was to observe, record, and stay out of the way. But Richard Thornton had other ideas. "And who is this?" he asked 20 minutes into the meeting, his eyes landing on Eliza with an expression she didn't like. "I don't recall approving a new assistant for you, Redford." Callum's voice remained level, but Eliza could see his jaw tighten. The tell she had learned meant he was controlling his temper. "Miss Whitfield is my personal assistant. Her presence doesn't require board approval." "Personal assistant?" Richard's smile was oily. "How convenient. And what exactly are her qualifications?" The implication was clear, and Eliza felt heat flood her cheeks. Several of the other board members shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. "Her qualifications," Callum said, his tone dropping to something dangerous, "are none of your concern. Now, If we could return to the actual agenda. I'm just saying, Richard interrupted, leaning back in his chair. It's interesting timing. You've been making some unusual decisions lately, Redford. Distracted, perhaps. It makes one wonder about your priorities. The room went silent. This wasn't just about Eliza anymore. It was a direct challenge to Callum's leadership. Eliza watched Callum's hands, saw them curl into fists beneath the table where no one else could see. His expression remained perfectly controlled, but she could sense the fury radiating from him. My priorities, Callum said quietly, standing up, have built this company into what it is today. My decisions have increased shareholder value by 47% in the last 2 years alone. And my personal staffing choices are exactly that. Personal. He placed both hands on the table, leaning forward. If you have concerns about the acquisition, Richard, voice them. If you're simply wasting everyone's time with petty territorial games, I suggest you reconsider your position on this board. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Richard's smile faltered. The meeting continued, tense and uncomfortable, but Richard didn't speak again. When it finally ended 2 hours later with the acquisition approved, Eliza began gathering her notes, ready to escape the oppressive atmosphere. Miss Whitfield. My office, Callum said, his voice still carrying that edge of barely controlled anger. Now. She followed him out, acutely aware of Richard's eyes tracking them, his expression smug despite his earlier defeat. Once they were in Callum's office with the door closed, Eliza expected him to be furious with her for somehow causing the confrontation. Instead, he turned to her with an expression she had never seen before, concern mixed with something that looked almost like fear. Are you all right? He asked. Eliza blinked, confused. I'm fine. I should be asking you that. He was completely inappropriate. He was targeting you to get to me. Callum moved to his desk, then away from it. That restless energy she had learned meant he was deeply unsettled. I should have anticipated it, should have protected you from— I don't need protecting, Eliza interrupted gently. I can handle a few snide comments. Callum stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. You shouldn't have to. Not from him. Not from anyone in this building. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. They were standing too close, closer than professional distance should allow. Eliza could see the tension in every line of his body, could feel the heat radiating from him. Mr. Redford— Callum. The word came out rough, almost pained. When we're alone, just— Callum. It was the first crack in his carefully constructed walls, the first time he had deviated from his own rigid rules. And Eliza felt something shift inside her chest, something warm and terrifying. Callum, she whispered, testing the name on her tongue. I really am fine. He reached up, and for one heart-stopping moment, she thought he was going to touch her face. His hand lifted, fingers almost brushing her cheek, and she could see the war playing out in his expression. Want versus control. Need versus discipline. Control won. His hand dropped and he stepped back, that familiar coldness sliding back into place like armor. Good, that's good. You can go. Take the rest of the afternoon off. But the acquisition reports— tomorrow. He turned away from her, facing the window. Please, Eliza, just go. The use of her first name, the plea in his voice, it told her everything. He was hanging on by a thread, and her presence was making it harder. She left quietly, but not before seeing his reflection in the window. He stood there motionless, one hand pressed against the glass, his eyes closed, looking like a man in exquisite pain. Callum didn't move for a long time after she left. He had almost touched her, almost broken every rule he had set, almost given in to the need that had been growing inside him like a wildfire out of control. The way Richard had looked at her, the implications in his words, it had taken everything in Callum not to physically throw the man out of the building. The protective rage that had consumed him was completely irrational, completely inappropriate, and completely unstoppable. This was getting worse, not better. He saw her everywhere now. In his apartment late at night when he was trying to work, her image appearing unbidden in his mind. In his car on the way to the office, anticipating seeing her. In meetings where he should be focused on business, but instead found himself planning excuses to call her into his office just to hear her voice. And the touching. God, the touching. He couldn't seem to stop himself, finding reasons to guide her with a hand on her back, brushing past her in doorways, reaching across her desk for files he could easily have asked her to hand him. Each innocent touch sent electricity through his entire body, and he knew. She felt it too. The way her breath would hitch, the way her pupils would dilate, the way she would freeze for just a moment before carefully stepping away. She was trying to maintain boundaries too. They were both fighting the same battle, but Callum was terrified that he was losing. He had been here before, had opened himself up to someone, had trusted, had allowed himself to feel, and it had destroyed him. The betrayal, the abandonment, the realization that the person he loved had never really loved him back. It had taught him that control was safety, that distance was survival. He couldn't go through that again, wouldn't survive it a second time. So he needed to get himself under control, needed to rebuild those walls, reinforce those boundaries. Remember that Eliza Whitfield was here because of a contract, not because she wanted to be. But even as he made those promises to himself, even as he swore he would do better, be stronger, maintain his discipline, he knew it was a lie. Because the truth was, he was already falling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The autumn had deepened into something colder, the kind of weather that turned London grey and made everyone hurry from building to building with their collars turned up against the wind. Eliza had been working for Callum for 6 weeks now, and the rhythm of their days had become almost comfortable, if you ignored the constant underlying tension that hummed between them like a live wire. She had learned to read him in ways that surprised even her. The subtle shift in his posture when a deal was going badly, the way his left hand would tap once against his thigh when he was holding back anger, how his voice would drop half an octave when he was truly focused, and how it would warm, just slightly, when he was pleased with something she had done. And he had started breaking his own rules with increasing frequency. It began small. Instead of Miss Whitfield, he would occasionally use Eliza, the name rolling off his tongue in a way that made her stomach flutter. He started asking about her father, how he was doing, if the recovery from the gambling addiction was going well. Questions that definitely fell into the personal matters he had forbidden on her first day. Then there were the lunches. Callum had a terrible habit of forgetting to eat when he was deep in work. Eliza had noticed that by 1:30, if he hadn't eaten, he would become short-tempered and unfocused. So she had started ordering food and bringing it to his office, casual and matter-of-fact, as if it were just part of her job. The first time, he had looked at the plate she set in front of him with something like confusion. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," Eliza had replied, already heading back to her desk. "But you need to eat." He hadn't argued. And the next day, when she brought lunch again, there were 2 plates instead of 1. He had ordered for both of them without asking, without discussion, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They started eating together, not every day, but often enough that it became routine. At first, they kept conversations strictly professional, upcoming meetings, contract details, strategic plans, but gradually, other things slipped in. "You went to Oxford?" Callum asked one afternoon, glancing at her resume that he apparently still kept in his desk drawer. "Why did you leave?" Eliza set down her fork carefully. They had never discussed this, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. But something about the way he asked, genuinely interested, not judgmental, made her answer honestly. "My mother got sick. Cancer. She needed someone, and my father he was already struggling. I was the only one who could help." She met his eyes. "I don't regret it. I got 2 more years with her before she died. That was worth more than any degree." Callum was quiet for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "That must have been difficult." "It was." Eliza picked up her water glass, needing something to do with her hands. "But it taught me what matters. Family, loyalty, being there when someone needs you, even when it's hard. And that's why you're here now," he said softly. "Saving your father again." "I'd do anything for him." She looked directly at Callum. "Some people are worth fighting for, no matter the cost." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he was going to say something, but instead he looked away, jaw tightening. "Your father is lucky to have you," was all he said. But Eliza could see the emotion beneath the words, could sense there was something he wasn't saying. Callum found himself thinking about that conversation for days afterward. The way Eliza had sacrificed her own dreams to take care of her mother, the unwavering loyalty she showed her father despite his mistakes. It was everything Callum had never experienced. His own parents had been cold, distant people who viewed their son as an extension of the family business rather than an actual person. Love had been conditional, affection earned through achievement. And the woman he had allowed himself to care about, to trust with his heart. She had proven that his parents were right to be cold. People left, people betrayed. Love was just another transaction, and he had been foolish enough to believe otherwise. But watching Eliza, seeing her genuine warmth with everyone in the office, the way she never complained about the long hours or difficult tasks, how she lit up when talking about her father's progress in recovery, it made him wonder if maybe he had just chosen the wrong person before. It was a dangerous thought. "You're staring again." Marcus appeared in Callum's doorway, his expression amused. Marcus Chen had been Callum's business partner for 8 years, the only person he truly considered a friend, and unfortunately, someone who was far too perceptive for Callum's comfort. "I'm working," Callum replied, not looking away from his computer screen. "Right, and I'm the Queen." Marcus settled into the chair across from Callum's desk, uninvited. "You've been different since she started. Distracted. More what? Human." Marcus grinned. "It's unsettling, honestly. The Callum Redford I know doesn't ask his assistant if she's cold and adjust the thermostat. He doesn't order 2 lunches. And he definitely doesn't nearly punch a board member for being rude to his staff. Richard Thornton was out of line. Richard Thornton is always out of line. You've never cared before." Marcus leaned forward. "You like her. She's my employee. That's not a denial." Callum finally looked up from his screen, meeting his friend's knowing gaze. "It doesn't matter what I feel, it wouldn't be appropriate. Since when do you care about appropriate? You've broken every business convention there is when it suited you." Marcus's expression softened slightly. "Look, I know what happened with Victoria messed you up, but Eliza isn't Victoria. Even I can see that, and I've only talked to her twice." The name hit Callum like a physical blow. Victoria. The woman who had promised to love him, who had shared his bed and his secrets, who had known every vulnerable part of him, and then had walked away the moment someone richer, more powerful had shown interest. She had proven that Callum's instincts were wrong, that opening yourself up to someone just gave them the power to destroy you. "This conversation is over," Callum said coldly. Marcus stood, but paused at the door. "She looks at you like you hung the moon, you know. And you look at her like she's the only thing keeping you tethered to Earth. Maybe stop fighting it and see where it goes." "Marcus, I know. Mind my own business." But he smiled. "Just think about it." After Marcus left, Callum sat in the silence of his office, watching through the open door as Eliza worked at her desk. She was reorganizing his files again, creating a system he would never understand, but that somehow made everything easier to find. Her hair was twisted into a messy bun, and she was biting her lip in concentration, completely absorbed in the task. She was beautiful, not in the polished, calculated way Victoria had been, but in a natural, genuine way that made his chest ache. And Marcus was right. Callum was fighting a losing battle, but he had to keep fighting. Because the alternative, letting himself feel, letting himself hope, letting himself fall, was too terrifying to contemplate, even if a part of him was already gone. The discovery happened by accident. Eliza had been filing contracts in Callum's office while he was in a meeting on the floor below. It was routine work, mindless enough that her thoughts could wander, while her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions. She reached for a folder that had been misfiled, pulling it from the cabinet, and another folder came with it, slipping from between 2 others and scattering papers across the floor. "Damn it," she muttered, kneeling to gather everything up. She was trying to keep them in order, making sure nothing got mixed up, when her eyes caught on a familiar name. Whitfield. Her heart stuttered. This was the file on her father's debts. She knew she should just put it back without looking, knew it was private, but curiosity won out. What could it hurt to see exactly what had been paid off? Maybe it would help her understand what she was really working for. Eliza opened the folder, expecting to see the £48,000 her father had owed, the number that had haunted her nightmares, that had seemed impossibly large when the collectors had first demanded it. The actual number made her vision blur. £175,000. She read it again, certain she was misunderstanding. But no, there it was in black and white, detailed in multiple documents. Callum hadn't just paid off her father's immediate debt. He had purchased the original loans at inflated prices, paid off additional interest that hadn't even come due yet, bought out collection agencies' claims, established a protection fund to prevent future harassment. He had spent more than 3 times what was actually owed, and there was more. Pages of legal agreements, contracts with people whose names Eliza didn't recognize, but whose roles were clear. Loan sharks, enforcers, the dangerous men who had been threatening her family. Callum had paid them all off, bought their silence, guaranteed they would never approach the Whitfield family again. This wasn't just help. This was protection. Complete, overwhelming, far beyond anything she could have imagined. Why? The question echoed in her mind as she heard footsteps approaching. She quickly shoved the papers back into the folder and returned it to the cabinet, her hands shaking, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. When Callum entered the office moments later, he found her standing by the filing cabinet, probably looking as guilty as she felt. "Are you all right?" he asked immediately, those sharp eyes taking in every detail of her expression. "You're pale." "I'm fine," Eliza managed, but her voice came out wrong. Too high, too strained. Callum crossed the room in 3 long strides, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "You're a terrible liar." "What happened?" She should have backed down, should have made up some excuse about feeling ill or stressed, but the question was burning inside her, demanding an answer. "Why did you pay so much?" His entire body went rigid. "What are you talking about?" "My father's debts. I saw the file. You paid—" She swallowed hard. "You paid almost 4 times what he actually owed. Why would you do that?" For a moment, Callum said nothing. Then he turned away from her, that familiar gesture of retreat she had come to recognize. It was necessary to ensure complete protection. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. Eliza felt something snap inside her. For weeks she had been dancing around this thing between them, pretending that the touches meant nothing, that the way he looked at her was just her imagination. But this level of protection, this amount of money, it wasn't about a business transaction. "You could have solved my problem for 1/4 of what you spent," she said, her voice stronger now. "You could have just paid off the immediate debt and walked away. Instead, you made sure no one would ever threaten us again. You bought protections that will last for years. Her voice cracked. "Why?" "Drop it, Eliza." His tone was warning, but she could hear something else beneath it. Fear. "No." She moved around him, forcing him to face her. "You don't get to save my entire family and then refuse to tell me why. I deserve to know the truth." Callum's jaw was so tight she could see the muscle jumping. His hands curled into fists at his sides, and his eyes, God, his eyes were filled with such raw emotion that it stole her breath. "You want the truth?" His voice was rough, dangerous. "Fine. I heard you that day at the bank. Heard the desperation in your voice, the way you were breaking but still fighting. And something about it, about you, got under my skin. I went home that night and I couldn't stop thinking about it, about those men hurting you, about you being afraid." He stepped closer, and Eliza's back hit the filing cabinet. They were inches apart now, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "So I made calls," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "Found out exactly who your father owed money to, exactly how dangerous they were. And I couldn't—" He stopped, his jaw working. "I couldn't let them hurt you, so I paid whatever it took to make sure they disappeared, to make sure you were safe. Not your father. You." Eliza's heart was hammering against her ribs. "That doesn't explain—" "I saw you once," Callum interrupted. "Once for 10 minutes. And you became the only thing I could think about. Does that make sense? No. Is it rational? Absolutely not. But there it is. The truth you wanted." The silence that followed was deafening. They stared at each other, the air between them crackling with everything unsaid, everything they had been fighting for weeks. "I should go," Callum finally said, his voice hoarse. He started to turn away, to retreat like he always did, but this time Eliza's hand shot out, catching his wrist. The contact sent electricity through her entire arm, and she saw Callum's eyes darken at the touch. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't run away. Not this time. Eliza, I think about you too." The confession tumbled out before she could stop it. "All the time. I know I shouldn't. I know this is just a job, just a contract, but I can't help it. When you look at me, when you touch me, even accidentally, I feel it everywhere." Callum closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the control she was so used to seeing had shattered. "This is a mistake. Probably. I'm your employer. This is inappropriate. I know. I could hurt you. I will hurt you. I've done it before to someone else, and I'll do it again because I don't know how to—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "You should go. Now." Before I do something we'll both regret. But Eliza didn't move. Couldn't move. They were trapped in this moment, in the truth that had finally been spoken, in the admission that whatever was between them was real and terrifying and completely out of control. "What if I don't regret it?" she asked softly. Callum made a sound that was half laugh, half groan. His free hand came up, fingers threading through her hair, and for one breathless moment she thought he was going to kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. "You don't understand what you're asking for. Then tell me. I can't do this halfway, Eliza. If we start, I won't be able to stop. I'll want everything. And when it falls apart, when you realize what a disaster I am, it will destroy us both." "You're not a disaster." "Yes," he said quietly. "I am." He pulled back then, physically separating himself from her, and Eliza felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. "Go home," Callum said, his voice rough. "Take the rest of the day. I need—" He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its perfect order. "I need to think." Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to push, wanted to close the distance between them and show him that she wasn't afraid. But she could see he was barely holding on, could sense that one more word would shatter whatever fragile control he had left. So she left, but not before seeing him slump against his desk the moment she turned away, one hand pressed over his face, looking like a man at war with himself, and losing. The days following their confrontation were torture. Callum didn't pull away completely. He couldn't, not when they worked in such close proximity, but he rebuilt his walls with desperate determination, creating distance wherever possible. He stopped eating lunch with her, stopped asking personal questions, stopped using her first name except when they were alone, and it slipped out before he could catch himself. But he couldn't stop the other things, the protective hand on her back when they walked through crowded spaces, the way his eyes tracked her movements across a room, how he positioned himself between her and anyone he deemed threatening, his body language screaming possession even as his words remained coldly professional. Eliza felt like she was losing her mind. Every accidental touch sent fire through her veins. Every time their eyes met, she saw the same hunger reflected back that she felt burning inside her. They were circling each other like magnets fighting their own nature, the pull growing stronger even as they both tried desperately to resist. The breaking point came during a business trip to Edinburgh. There was a major conference that required both their attendance, 3 days of meetings, networking events and presentations. Callum had tried to send her alone with his notes, but Marcus had pointed out how suspicious that would look, how it would give Richard Thornton ammunition to question his decision-making. So they flew to Scotland together on a grey November morning, the tension in the private car to the airport so thick Eliza could barely breathe. "Separate rooms at the hotel," Callum said without looking at her, his gaze fixed on his tablet. "Obviously?" "Obviously," Eliza echoed, trying not to feel hurt by how quickly he said it. "The schedule is packed. We'll barely see each other outside of conference events." "That's fine. And at the gala dinner tomorrow night." He paused, finally looking at her. "You'll need something appropriate to wear. Use the company card. Get whatever you need." Eliza wanted to argue that she could manage her own wardrobe, but the truth was her savings wouldn't cover the kind of dress expected at these events. "Thank you." The first day was manageable. They attended presentations together, Eliza taking notes while Callum networked with other executives. He was brilliant in these settings, commanding every room he entered, his presence impossible to ignore. She watched him negotiate, strategize, charm when necessary, and intimidate when required. She had always known he was successful, but seeing him in action like this, watching how people deferred to him, respected him, even feared him a little, it was intoxicating. That evening they had dinner with potential investors. Callum was seated at one end of the long table, Eliza at the other. She could feel his eyes on her throughout the meal, could sense his attention even when he was deep in conversation with the person beside him. Halfway through dessert, one of the investors, a man in his 50s with wandering eyes, leaned too close to Eliza, his hand landing on her arm. "So tell me, how did a lovely young thing like you end up working for Redford? He's not exactly known for his warm personality." Eliza shifted uncomfortably, trying to subtly remove her arm from his grip. "Mr. Redford is an excellent employer." "I'm sure he is." The man's smile was oily. "But surely you must find it lonely, working such long hours for a man who's all business and no pleasure." Before Eliza could formulate a response, Callum appeared beside her chair, She hadn't even seen him move. "Excuse me, gentlemen." His voice was pleasant, but there was steel beneath it. "I need to steal my assistant for a moment. Schedule conflicts to resolve." His hand settled on Eliza's shoulder, warm and possessive, and she stood immediately. The investor released her arm, his expression flickering with something like fear as he met Callum's cold gaze. They walked out of the private dining room in silence, Callum's hand shifting to the small of her back. Only when they were in the empty hallway did he finally speak. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." "He was just touching you," Callum interrupted, his jaw tight. "Without permission. I could have handled it. You shouldn't have to." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his expression made her stomach flutter. "Every man in that room was looking at you. Do you have any idea how difficult it was to sit there watching them look, knowing I couldn't—" He stopped abruptly, jaw clenching. "Couldn't what?" Eliza asked softly. Callum's eyes dropped to her mouth, and she saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. "We should go back." "Callum, don't!" His voice was rough. "Don't say my name like that. Don't look at me like that. I'm barely holding on as it is." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Eliza took a step closer and watched his breathing change, watched the pulse jump in his throat. "Maybe you should stop holding on," she whispered. For one breathless moment, she thought he would kiss her. His hand lifted, fingers almost touching her face, his head tilting slightly. She could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the war playing out in his expression. Then voices echoed from the dining room, laughter carrying into the hallway. The spell broke. Callum stepped back, that familiar coldness sliding into place. "I'll have a car take you back to the hotel. I need to finish this dinner." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He was already walking away. "Good night, Miss Whitfield." The use of her last name felt like a slap, but Eliza understood what he was doing, rebuilding walls, re-establishing distance, protecting himself from whatever this was between them. She took the car back to the hotel, spent the night tossing and turning in sheets that felt too cold, too empty. Down the hall, Callum lay awake too, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince himself that staying away from her was the right choice, even though every instinct he possessed was screaming the opposite. The next evening was the gala dinner, the most important event of the conference. Eliza had chosen a dress in deep emerald green that hugged her curves perfectly, with a neckline that was elegant without being inappropriate. She had left her hair down, loose waves falling past her shoulders. When she met Callum in the hotel lobby, his reaction was everything she hadn't dared hope for. He stopped mid-step, his eyes widening fractionally before that control slammed back into place. But she had seen it. The heat, the want, the barely restrained need. "You look—" He trailed off, jaw tightening. "Appropriate." It was possibly the worst compliment she had ever received, but the way his eyes kept drifting back to her, the way his hand trembled slightly when he helped her into the car, that told her the truth. And tonight, at this gala surrounded by London's elite, everything was about to change. The ballroom was magnificent, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over hundreds of guests in formal attire, champagne flowing freely, a string quartet playing softly in the corner. This was where deals were made and alliances formed, where power and money mingled with practiced ease. Eliza felt completely out of her depth. She stayed close to Callum as they navigated through the crowd, his hand occasionally settling on her back to guide her. Each touch sent electricity through her body, making it hard to focus on the conversations happening around them. "I need to speak with the Henderson group," Callum murmured, leaning close enough that his breath stirred her hair. "It should take about 20 minutes. Will you be all right?" Eliza nodded, trying to ignore how her skin tingled where his breath had touched. "I'll be fine." But she watched him walk away with something close to longing, immediately feeling exposed without his presence beside her. Well, well. Redford's mysterious new assistant. Eliza turned to find a man approaching her, champagne glass in hand, his smile charming but his eyes calculating. He was handsome in a polished way, perfect hair, expensive suit, the kind of confidence that came from old money and older family names. "I'm sorry, have we met?" Eliza asked politely. "Not formally. James Whitmore." He extended his hand, holding hers a moment too long when she shook it. "I've been doing business with Redford Enterprises for years, though I must say, Callum's never had such lovely assistants before." There was something in his tone that made Eliza uncomfortable, but she kept her expression neutral. "That's kind of you to say." "I'm curious." James moved closer, and Eliza instinctively stepped back, only to find herself against one of the ballroom's marble columns. How does someone like you end up working for someone like Callum Redford? He's not exactly known for being approachable. Mr. Redford is an excellent employer, Eliza replied, the same response she had given the investor the night before. I'm sure he is. But between you and me, James's hand landed on the column beside her head, effectively trapping her. You seem far too warm, too alive to be stuck behind a desk organizing his schedule. A woman like you deserves more attention than Redford could ever give. Eliza's heart was pounding, but not with attraction, with discomfort that was rapidly turning to fear. Excuse me, I should what? James leaned closer, his other hand moving to her waist. Stay and talk with me for a moment. I promise I'm much more interesting than... Take your hands off her. The voice was quiet, deadly, and made every person in their vicinity fall silent. Callum stood 3 feet away, and Eliza had never seen him look like this. His expression was controlled, but his eyes were blazing with barely restrained fury. His entire body was coiled tight, like a predator about to strike. James removed his hands immediately, stepping back with a nervous laugh. Redford, we were just talking. No. Callum closed the distance between them in 2 strides, positioning himself between James and Eliza. You were touching my assistant without her consent. There's a difference. I didn't mean any harm. I don't care what you meant. Callum's voice dropped to something dangerous. You made her uncomfortable. That alone is unforgivable. The small crowd that had gathered was watching with undisguised interest. This was the kind of drama that would be discussed for months. Callum Redford, known for his icy control, looking like he was 2 seconds from physically removing James from the building. Callum, Eliza said softly, her hand touching his arm. She could feel the tension vibrating through him, could sense how close he was to losing control completely. It's fine. I'm fine. He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. It's not fine. Then Callum did something that changed everything. His hand slid around her waist, pulling her against his side with unmistakable possessiveness. The gesture was clear, territorial, a statement that couldn't be misinterpreted. She's with me, he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. Not his assistant, not his employee. With him. Eliza felt her entire world tilt. Every eye in the ballroom was on them now, and she could practically hear the gossip starting already. But Callum didn't seem to care. His arm stayed firmly around her waist, his body angled protectively, his expression daring anyone to challenge him. James backed away quickly, muttering apologies, and the crowd slowly began to disperse. But the damage, or perhaps the revelation, was done. When they were finally alone, or as alone as they could be in a room full of people, Eliza looked up at Callum. For you just told everyone... I know what I did. His jaw was still tight, but his hand remained on her waist. I don't care. Your reputation. I don't care, he repeated, fiercer this time. His other hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone in a gesture so tender it made her eyes burn. I've been trying to stay away from you, trying to maintain distance, to keep this professional. But watching him touch you, seeing you trapped... He stopped, jaw working. I can't do this anymore. Can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. Callum, I want you, Eliza. The words came out raw, honest. Not as my assistant, not because of some contract. I want you, and I'm tired of fighting it. The ballroom seemed to fade away, until there was nothing but him. Nothing but those dark eyes burning into hers. Nothing but the thundering of her own heart. I want you too, she whispered. Something in Callum's expression cracked, years of control finally shattering. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, his breathing uneven. We should leave. Yes. Now. Yes. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that felt more intimate than it should, and led her out of the ballroom. Behind them, the whispers started immediately, but neither of them looked back. They didn't go far that night, just to the hotel lobby, where reality crashed back over them like cold water. Callum stopped abruptly, releasing her hand as if it burned him, running his fingers through his hair in frustration. I shouldn't have... He turned away from her. That was unprofessional. Reckless. Eliza felt her heart sink. Of course. The moment they left the ballroom, away from James and the protective fury, his control was reasserting itself. Callum, we should talk about this tomorrow, when we're back in London, when we can think clearly. His voice was strained. Good night, Eliza. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing in the lobby feeling like she had been punched in the stomach. The return to London was silent and awkward, but when they arrived at the office Monday morning, everything exploded. Richard Thornton was waiting in Callum's office, his expression smug in a way that made Eliza's stomach turn. He wasn't alone. There were 2 other board members with him, both looking uncomfortable. "We need to talk," Richard said without preamble. "About your assistant." Callum's entire body went rigid. "Get out." "I don't think so." Richard pulled out his phone, showing them a series of photos from the gala. Callum and Eliza together, his hand on her waist, the possessive way he held her. "These have been making the rounds. People are talking, Redford, about how you acquired her services, about the nature of your relationship. There's nothing inappropriate about, really, because I did some digging." Richard's smile widened. "Your assistant's father owed a substantial amount of money to some very dangerous people. Then suddenly those debts disappear, and at the exact same time, she starts working for you under a very unusual contract." He leaned forward. "It looks an awful lot like you bought yourself a companion, Callum, and that's the kind of scandal that destroys reputations." The blood drained from Eliza's face. This was her worst nightmare, Callum being damaged because of her. "You have no proof of anything improper," Callum said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I don't need proof. I just need the appearance." Richard crossed his arms. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to step back from the Henderson acquisition. Give me lead on the project. You're going to support my proposals at the next 3 board meetings. And you're going to be very careful about how much time you spend with your pretty assistant. Or what? Or I make sure everyone knows the details of your little arrangement. Clients, investors, shareholders, they'll all hear about how the great Callum Redford's judgment has been compromised by an inappropriate relationship with an employee he essentially purchased." Eliza couldn't breathe. This was all her fault. She had brought this danger to him, had made him vulnerable. "I'll resign," she said suddenly, her voice shaking. "I'll tear up the contract, leave immediately, whatever it takes to make this go away." "Eliza, no," Callum started, but Richard laughed. "That would certainly help, though the damage is already done." "Then I'll pay back every penny," Eliza continued desperately. "I'll work the rest of my life if I have to, but I won't let you destroy him because of me." "Eliza!" Callum's voice cut through her panic. "Stop!" He turned to Richard, and the expression on his face made the other man actually step back. "Get out of my office. Now. You're making a mistake. Out!" The word was roared, loud enough that people in the outer offices probably heard. "And you can tell the board that if they have concerns about my personal life affecting my judgment, they can vote me out. But I will not be blackmailed by a pathetic excuse for a businessman who's been trying to undermine me for years, because he knows he'll never be half the leader I am." Richard's face went red. "You'll regret this. The only thing I regret is not kicking you off the board months ago." Callum moved toward him, and Richard actually backed toward the door. "You have 10 seconds to leave before I throw you out personally." The 3 men scrambled out, Richard's threats echoing down the hallway. The moment they were gone, Callum turned to Eliza. She was already gathering her things. "I meant what I said. I'll leave. No." He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. "You're not going anywhere." "But he'll ruin you." "I don't care." The words rang out between them, shocking them both into silence. "I don't care," Callum repeated, quieter but no less intense. "Do you understand? He can tell whoever he wants. He can spread whatever rumors make him feel important. I don't care. Your reputation means nothing compared to you." His hand slid from her shoulders to cup her face, tilting it up to meet his gaze. "I've spent my entire life building walls, maintaining control, protecting myself. And you walked into my life and shattered everything. Every rule I made, every promise I swore to keep. You broke all of it. Callum, I'm in love with you." The confession came out raw, desperate. "I've been in love with you since that day at the bank, since I heard you fighting for your father with nothing but hope and determination, and I won't, let you leave to protect me from scandal. You don't leave. Not now. Not ever." Eliza felt tears streaming down her face. "I love you too." His forehead dropped to rest against hers, his breathing ragged. "Then we face this together." "Together," she agreed. But even as she said it, she could see the fear in his eyes, the terror of being hurt again, of trusting someone with his heart, only to have it destroyed. They had admitted their feelings, but the real battle was just beginning. The days following Richard's threats were tense. Callum refused to give in to the blackmail, but the stress was visible in the tight set of his shoulders, the way he worked even later than usual, the darkness under his eyes that suggested he wasn't sleeping. What Eliza didn't know was where he was spending those sleepless nights. The first time Callum parked outside her apartment building, he told himself it was just to make sure she got home safely. Richard's threats had made him paranoid, worried that somehow the danger might extend beyond professional scandal to actual harm. But that was a lie, and he knew it. The truth was simpler and more complicated. He needed to know she was safe, needed to see her lights turn on, watch her shadow move past the windows, know that she was there, alive, real. So he sat in his car, sometimes for hours, watching her building like some kind of obsessed stalker. He knew it was wrong, knew it crossed every boundary of appropriate behavior, but he couldn't stop. On the fifth night it was raining, one of those cold November downpours that turned London streets into rivers. Callum sat in his car watching water stream down the windshield, watching Eliza's light turn on in her third-floor flat. He should leave, should go home to his empty penthouse and stop this ridiculous vigil. Instead, he stayed. He didn't see her come down until she was already knocking on his car window, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, looking furious and beautiful. Callum's heart stopped. He rolled down the window. "What are you doing?" "You're getting soaked." "What am I doing?" Eliza's eyes were blazing. "What are you doing? I've seen your car out here every night for a week, sitting here watching. Do you think I don't notice?" He had no defense, no explanation that would make sense. "I needed to make sure you were safe." "Safe from what?" "Richard's threats are about scandal, not physical danger." She crossed her arms, shivering in the rain. "Try again." Callum stared at her, water dripping down her face, her expression demanding honesty. And something inside him broke. All the control, all the careful distance, all the walls he had been desperately trying to rebuild. "I can't stay away from you," he said, his voice rough. "I try. Every day I tell myself to maintain boundaries, to keep things professional. But then I wonder if you've eaten, if you're warm enough, if you're safe, and it drives me insane until I have to see for myself. So you sit out here in the rain like some kind of—" She stopped, her expression softening. "You're an idiot." "I know. If you wanted to make sure I was okay, you could just come upstairs." "That would be inappropriate." "And stalking my apartment isn't?" But there was no real anger in her voice now, just exasperation mixed with something tender. They stared at each other through the rain, the space between them charged with everything unsaid, everything they had been fighting for months. "Come upstairs," Eliza said quietly. "Please." Callum should have said no, should have driven away, maintained the distance that was supposed to keep them both safe. Instead, he turned off the car and got out into the rain. By the time they reached her door, they were both drenched, water dripping onto the hallway floor. Eliza's hands shook as she tried to fit the key into the lock, and Callum covered her hand with his, helping her turn it. The door opened. They stood on the threshold, neither moving. "Callum," Eliza whispered, turning to face him, "I can't keep doing this. Can't keep pretending that working for you is enough, that being near you but not with you doesn't hurt." "I know." His hand came up to cup her face, water dripping from both of them. "I'm terrified, Eliza. Of this. Of how much I feel. Of how badly it will destroy me when—" "When what?" "When I leave." She placed her hand over his heart, feeling it thunder beneath her palm. "I'm not going anywhere, I told you that. How many times do I have to say it before you believe me? I was betrayed before. I'm not her." Eliza's voice was fierce now. "Whoever hurt you, whoever made you think love was dangerous, I'm not her. I'm here. I'm real. And I love you even when you're being an idiot sitting in your car watching my windows." Something in Callum's expression cracked completely. "I love you," he breathed. "God help me. I love you so much it terrifies me." "Then stop being terrified," Eliza whispered. "Stop running, stop hiding. Just be here with me." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was desperate, hungry, months of restraint finally shattering. His hands buried in her wet hair, pulling her closer, and she responded with equal intensity, her fingers gripping his soaked jacket, holding him like she would never let go. They stumbled inside, the door slamming shut behind them. Callum pressed her against it, his mouth exploring hers, tasting, claiming. Eliza's head fell back against the wood, a soft sound escaping her throat that made him groan. "We should stop," he murmured against her lips, even as his hands traced the curve of her waist. "This is—" "Don't you dare," Eliza breathed, pulling him back. "Don't you dare stop now." So he didn't. He kissed her until they were both breathless, until the cold rain on their clothes became heat between their bodies, until nothing existed except this, the taste of her mouth, the feel of her against him, the knowledge that he was completely, irrevocably lost. And for the first time in years, Callum stopped fighting, stopped trying to control, stopped being afraid. He just surrendered. They moved through her small flat, still kissing, shedding wet coats and shoes, leaving a trail of water across the hardwood floor. Eliza's hands trembled as she worked the buttons of Callum's shirt, and he caught her fingers gently, bringing them to his lips. "We don't have to," he started, his voice rough with restraint. "I want to," Eliza interrupted, looking up at him with eyes that held no doubt. "I've wanted this for months." Something in Callum's expression shifted, vulnerability mixing with desire, fear intertwining with need. He cupped her face with both hands, studying her like she was something precious and fragile. "If we do this, everything changes." It already changed. She stood on her toes, pressing a soft kiss to his jaw. "The moment you heard me at that bank, the moment you decided to save me." He made a sound low in his throat, gathering her close. "I don't deserve you. That's not your choice to make." Eliza's fingers traced the strong line of his shoulders. "It's mine, and I choose you." Callum kissed her again, slower this time, with a tenderness that made her chest ache. He guided her backward to the bedroom, his movements careful, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. But Eliza had never been more certain of anything in her life. The room was small, lit only by the streetlights filtering through the rain-streaked window. Callum sat on the edge of her bed, pulling her to stand between his legs, his hands settling on her hips. "You're shaking," he murmured, concerned. "So are you," she whispered back, and it was true. She could feel the tremor in his fingers, see the vulnerability in his eyes that he usually kept hidden. "I'm terrified of hurting you," Callum admitted quietly, "of this being a mistake. Have you realizing I'm not—" Eliza silenced him with a kiss, pouring everything she felt into it, all her love, her certainty, her complete trust. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "You're not going to hurt me," she said firmly. "And this isn't a mistake. Stop thinking, just feel." So he did. He took his time, worshipping every inch of her with hands that shook despite their gentle confidence. Each touch was deliberate, reverent, as if he were memorizing her. When Eliza's breath hitched, he paused, his eyes searching hers for any sign of hesitation. "Don't stop," she breathed. The vulnerability between them was staggering. This wasn't just physical. It was Callum letting down every wall he had spent years building, and Eliza offering him trust that had been hard-earned. Every kiss carried weight. Every caress spoke of emotions too deep for words. When they finally came together, moving as one, Eliza felt tears slip down her cheeks. Not from pain or sadness, but from the overwhelming rightness of it. The way Callum held her like she was everything. The way he whispered her name like a prayer. The way their hearts seemed to beat in perfect synchronization. "I love you," Callum breathed against her temple, his voice breaking. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Eliza whispered back, her fingers tangling in his hair, always. Afterward, they lay tangled together in sheets that smelled like rain and new beginnings. Callum traced lazy patterns on Eliza's bare shoulder, his expression more peaceful than she had ever seen it. The mask he wore so constantly had completely fallen away, leaving only the man beneath, vulnerable, loving, utterly hers. "I never thought I could feel this again," he said quietly, his fingers following the curve of her spine. "Never thought I could trust someone enough to—" He stopped, jaw tightening. Eliza turned in his arms to face him. "Tell me about her." About what happened? For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he took a shaky breath. Victoria. Her name was Victoria. His voice was carefully controlled, but Eliza could hear the old pain beneath it. "We were together for 2 years. I thought she was the one. I opened up completely, showed her every part of me, the good and the terrible. I trusted her with everything. What happened? She met someone else. Someone richer, more powerful, more everything I apparently wasn't." His laugh was bitter. "She told me she never really loved me, that I was too cold, too controlled, too damaged, that being with me was like being with a machine that occasionally pretended to have feelings." Eliza's heart broke for him. That's not true, isn't it? He looked at her with eyes full of doubt. You've seen how I am. The rules, the control, the inability to just... You're the most feeling person I've ever met, Eliza interrupted fiercely. You just hide it because you're scared. But I see you, Callum. I see how you care about everyone in the office, even when you pretend not to. I see how you protected me from the beginning. I see how you're holding me right now like I might disappear. His arms tightened around her instinctively. Because you might. I won't. She pressed her hand over his heart. I'm here. I'm real. And I'm not her. Callum buried his face in her hair, breathing her in. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped around each other, rain still drumming against the windows. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both. Eliza drifted off first, safe in Callum's arms. But he stayed awake long into the night watching her sleep, marveling at the trust she showed by being so vulnerable with him. For the first time since Victoria's betrayal, Callum felt hope. Real, terrifying, beautiful hope that maybe he could have this. Maybe he could be loved without conditions. Maybe Eliza truly meant it when she said she wouldn't leave. But in the back of his mind, that old fear whispered its poison. Everyone leaves eventually. The next 2 weeks were the happiest of Eliza's life. She and Callum stopped hiding their relationship, showing up to work together, sharing lunches openly, exchanging looks across conference rooms that made Marcus grin knowingly. Richard's threats hadn't materialized into anything substantial. The board had held a meeting where Callum addressed the rumors directly, explaining that yes, he was in a relationship with his assistant, and no, it didn't affect his professional judgment. Some disapproved, but no one could argue with his track record. Everything should have been perfect. But Eliza noticed small things. The way Callum would sometimes wake in the middle of the night, staring at her like he was trying to memorize her face. How he held her a little too tightly, as if afraid she might slip away. The questions he asked that seemed casual but weren't. About her plans, her future, whether she was happy. I'm not going anywhere, she told him one morning, cupping his face. You can stop waiting for me to leave. I know, he said, but his eyes told a different story. Then Victoria came back. Eliza was working at her desk when the woman walked into the office without announcement, moving with the kind of confidence that came from old familiarity. She was stunning, tall, elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer suit that probably cost more than Eliza's monthly rent. Where's Callum? She asked the receptionist, her tone suggesting she had every right to be there. Eliza's stomach dropped. She knew immediately who this was. I'm sorry, do you have an appointment? The receptionist asked nervously. I don't need one. Victoria's smile was sharp. Just tell him Victoria's here. He'll see me. Callum emerged from his office at the sound of her voice, and Eliza watched all the color drain from his face. For a moment, he looked like he had seen a ghost. Victoria. His voice was carefully neutral. What are you doing here? I needed to see you. She moved toward him, ignoring everyone else in the office. It's been 2 years, Callum. Can we talk? Privately? Eliza felt something cold settle in her stomach. The way Victoria looked at him, the familiarity in her tone. This was the woman who had broken him, who had made him build those walls. Callum's eyes met Eliza's briefly, and she saw conflict warring in his expression. Then he nodded. My office. They disappeared behind the closed door, and Eliza tried to focus on work, but her hands were shaking. Through the glass walls, she could see them talking, could see Victoria touching Callum's arm, leaning close, her expression pleading. Marcus appeared beside Eliza's desk. Don't let her get in your head. Victoria's poison. What does she want? What she always wanted, whatever she can't have. Marcus's expression was unusually serious. She only came back because Callum's finally happy. Can't stand it. 30 minutes later, Victoria emerged looking satisfied. She paused by Eliza's desk. You must be the assistant. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. How sweet. Good luck with him, dear. You'll need it. Then she was gone, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and subtle menace. Callum stood in his office doorway, his expression unreadable. Eliza, come here. She followed him inside, her heart pounding. He closed the door and moved to the window, his back to her, that familiar gesture of retreat. What did she want? Eliza asked quietly. She says she made a mistake. That leaving me was the biggest regret of her life. Callum's voice was flat. She wants another chance. The words hit Eliza like physical blows. And what did you say? I told her no. Of course I told her no. He turned to face her, and Eliza saw something that terrified her. Doubt. Fear. The walls rebuilding themselves brick by brick. But seeing her again, it reminded me of things I'd tried to forget. What things? How much it hurt when she left. How completely I trusted her, and how wrong I was. His hands clenched into fists. How trusting anyone that much is a mistake I swore I'd never make again. But you trust me, Eliza said, her voice shaking. Do I? The question was quiet, devastating. Or am I just repeating the same pattern, hoping for a different result? Callum, I'm not her. Everyone says that. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its careful order. Everyone promises they'll stay. And then they don't. Eliza felt tears burning behind her eyes. So what are you saying, that this was a mistake, that us being together? I don't know. The words exploded from him. I don't know anything anymore. All I know is that I'm terrified of losing you, of trusting you, of this feeling like it's everything only to have it ripped away. So you're going to push me away first, Eliza said, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. Before I can leave on my own. Callum's silence was answer enough. Eliza stood there looking at the man she loved, watching him retreat behind those walls she had worked so hard to break through. And she realized something painful. Loving him wasn't enough if he couldn't let himself be loved. I can't do this, she whispered. I can't keep proving myself to you. Can't keep fighting your ghosts. Eliza, the contract ends in 6 months, but I'm done now. Her voice broke. I'm done watching you wait for me to hurt you. I'm done being compared to someone who didn't deserve you in the first place. She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the handle. I love you, but you have to choose to believe that. And until you can, we're just destroying each other. Don't go, Callum said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was already letting her leave, already protecting himself. Eliza looked back at him one last time, memorizing every detail. The strong jaw, the dark eyes now filled with pain, the man she had fallen completely in love with. Then she walked out. Callum stood in his empty office for a long time after Eliza left, staring at the door she had walked through. The silence was deafening. Everything looked the same. The perfectly organized desk, the files in their proper places, the view of the Thames that usually calmed him. But nothing felt right. He tried to work, tried to focus on the merger he had been negotiating for months, but the words on the contracts blurred together, meaningless. All he could see was Eliza's face, the tears she had fought to hide, the devastation in her eyes when he couldn't give her what she needed, what she deserved. 3 days passed, the longest 3 days of Callum's life. Marcus found him in his office late on the 3rd night, staring at nothing. The city lights glittered below, but Callum saw none of it. He was trapped in his own mind, replaying every moment with Eliza, every choice that had led to this. You're an idiot, Marcus said without preamble. I know. Victoria played you perfectly, showed up, reminded you of old pain, and you immediately sabotaged the best thing that's ever happened to you. I know, Callum repeated, his voice hollow. So fix it. I can't. Callum finally looked at his friend. She was right. I keep waiting for her to hurt me. Keep comparing her to Victoria when she's nothing like her. How can I ask her to stay when I can't even trust? That's fear talking, Marcus interrupted, and I've never seen you let fear win before. On the 4th day, everything fell apart. The Henderson acquisition, the deal Callum had been working on for months, collapsed. The client had heard about the instability in his personal life and decided to go with a competitor. 2 other major clients followed, spooked by the same rumors. Richard Thornton called an emergency board meeting, using the lost deals as ammunition to question Callum's leadership. Half the board sided with Richard, demanding changes, suggesting Callum step down temporarily. It was a disaster. Everything Callum had built, everything he had sacrificed for, crumbling because of gossip and fear, and he didn't care. He sat through that board meeting, listening to their concerns and accusations, and all he could think about was Eliza. The way she smiled when she brought him coffee, how she reorganized his desk without asking, the sound of her laugh, the way she had looked at him like he was worth loving despite all his damage. He had chosen control over love, had chosen fear over faith, had chosen to protect himself instead of fighting for her, and it was the biggest mistake of his life. In the middle of Richard's speech about responsibility and proper conduct, Callum stood up. The room fell silent. I'm done, he said quietly. Richard smiled triumphantly, finally seeing reason. I'm done listening to people who've never built anything question my judgment. Callum's voice was calm, but absolute. I'm done pretending that business matters more than the people we claim to serve, and I'm done letting fear dictate my choices. He looked around the table at the shocked faces. You want me to step down? Fine, vote. But know this, I've given everything to this company. My time, my energy, my life. The one thing I haven't given is my heart, because I was too afraid of losing it. And that fear almost cost me the only thing that actually matters. Mr. Redford, I'm in love with Eliza Whitfield, Callum continued, his voice growing stronger. She's brilliant, loyal, and the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I was so terrified of being hurt again that I pushed her away. So you can judge that, condemn it, use it against me. But I'm through apologizing for being human. He grabbed his coat. I'm leaving. Vote however you want. Fire me if you must. But right now I have something more important to do than save my career. Where are you going? Marcus asked, grinning. To get her back. The storm hit just as Callum reached Eliza's building. Rain pounded down in sheets, thunder rolling across the sky. He was soaked within seconds, but he didn't care. He ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time, his heart hammering. He knocked on her door, no answer. Knocked again, harder. The door finally opened, and there she was. Hair in a messy bun, wearing old sweats, eyes red like she had been crying. She looked beautiful. Callum, what are you? You're soaked. I was terrified, he interrupted, water dripping from his hair. I was betrayed before, abandoned, and it broke something inside me. I built walls so high I forgot what it was like to feel. Then you walked into my life and you broke through every single one. Callum, let me finish, please. He took a shaky breath. I'm terrified of losing you, of trusting you completely and having it destroyed. But I just realized something. Living without you is worse than any pain she could have caused. Watching you walk away was worse than anything Victoria ever did. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. I can't promise I won't be afraid sometimes, Callum continued. Can't promise I won't have moments of doubt, but I promise to fight through them, to choose you over my fear, to believe you when you say you're staying. Why now? Eliza whispered. What changed? I lost everything today. Career, reputation, everything I thought mattered, and all I could think about was you. He stepped closer. You're all that matters. The rain poured down around them, soaking them both, but neither moved. I love you, Callum said. And I'm done running. Eliza launched herself into his arms. They kissed in the doorway, rain pouring down around them, both soaked and shivering but neither caring. Eliza's fingers tangled in Callum's wet hair, pulling him closer, and he lifted her off her feet, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I'm sorry, he murmured against her lips between kisses. I'm so sorry. I was an idiot. Yes, you were, Eliza agreed, then kissed him again to soften the words. But you came back. That's what matters. They stumbled inside, leaving puddles on the floor, unable to stop touching each other. Callum cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing away tears that mixed with rainwater. I love you, he said, and this time there was no fear in his voice, just certainty. I love you and I choose you, every day, no matter what. I love you too. Eliza smiled through her tears. Even when you're being impossibly stubborn. He laughed, a real laugh, full and genuine, and pulled her close. What did I do to deserve you? You saved my father. You protected my family. You saw me when I was at my lowest and decided I was worth fighting for. She looked up at him with shining eyes. You gave me everything, Callum. Now let me give you the same. They stood there holding each other, both finally understanding that love wasn't about walls or protection. It was about trust. About choosing to be vulnerable even when it terrified you. What happened at the board meeting? Eliza asked eventually, reality creeping back in. Callum shrugged. I walked out, told them all exactly how I felt about you, about us. They might fire me. Callum. I don't care. He kissed her forehead. I meant what I said. You're more important than any career, than anything. As it turned out, the board didn't fire him. In fact, Marcus called the next morning to report that Callum's passionate defense of his relationship had won over several previously skeptical board members. Richard had been outvoted on every proposal, and 2 major clients had actually called to reinstate their contracts, impressed by Callum's integrity. Apparently, Marcus said with audible amusement, people respect a man who fights for what he loves. The weeks that followed were transformative. Callum and Eliza made their relationship official. Not hiding, not apologizing, just being together openly. The office gossip eventually died down when everyone realized how happy Callum was, how much better he functioned with Eliza by his side. Eliza's father, Robert, finally met Callum 3 months later. He arrived at their lunch meeting nervous, ashamed of the debt that had brought them together. But Callum shook his hand firmly and said, "Your daughter saved my life, so I think we're even." Robert saw how Callum looked at Eliza, like she hung the moon and stars, and gave his blessing without hesitation. 6 months after the rainstorm reconciliation, on a clear spring evening, Callum took Eliza to the riverside, where his office overlooked the Thames. They walked along the path as the sun set, painting the water gold and orange. "This is where I first saw you," Callum said quietly, stopping at a particular spot. "Well, not exactly here, but close enough. I was up there," he pointed to his office building, "and you were walking away from the bank, defeated, broken, but still fighting." "I remember that day," Eliza murmured. "Worst day of my life, until it became the best." Callum turned to face her, taking both her hands. "I've spent most of my life afraid of trusting, of loving, of letting anyone see the real me. You changed all of that. You showed me that being vulnerable isn't weakness. It's the bravest thing we can do." "Callum," he dropped to one knee, and Eliza's breath caught. "I don't have a perfect past. I've made mistakes, pushed you away, nearly lost you because of my own fear. But I promise you this." He pulled out a simple ring, a single diamond that caught the fading sunlight. "I will spend every day choosing you, choosing us, choosing love over fear." Tears streamed down Eliza's face. "Eliza Whitfield, will you marry me?" "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her deeply, thoroughly, pouring everything he felt into it. Around them, people walking by smiled and applauded, but they barely noticed. They had found each other in the darkest moment and built something beautiful from desperation and hope. 1 year later, the house they had built together sat on a quiet street outside London, surrounded by gardens that Eliza had insisted on planting herself. It was smaller than Callum's old penthouse, cozier, filled with warmth and laughter instead of cold minimalism. Callum stood on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Eliza joined him, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, 5 months pregnant with their first child. "Nervous?" she asked, leaning into his side. "Terrified," Callum admitted, his hand covering hers on her stomach, "but the good kind of terrified." She smiled. "You're going to be an amazing father." "I had no example to follow. My parents were—" "You'll be nothing like them," Eliza interrupted firmly. "You'll be present, loving, maybe a little overprotective." "Definitely overprotective," Callum agreed, grinning. They stood there as the sun disappeared below the horizon, wrapped in each other's arms. Callum thought about how far they had come, from a desperate plea in a bank to this moment of perfect peace, how he had almost lost everything because he was too afraid to hold on. "Do you still get scared?" Eliza asked quietly, reading his thoughts like she always could. "Every day," Callum admitted honestly. "Scared that I'll wake up and this will all be a dream, that I don't deserve this happiness. And what do you do when you're scared?" He pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I look at you, at this life we've built, and I remember that you chose me, that you keep choosing me. And suddenly the fear doesn't seem so big anymore." Eliza turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Callum Redford. Today, tomorrow, always." "Always," he echoed, and kissed her as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. They had both been broken when they found each other, but together they had become whole. Not perfect, they still argued, still had moments of doubt and fear, but they faced everything together, choosing love over fear, trust over control, hope over despair. And that made all the difference. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.